Good evening and welcome to After Hours. Joining us this evening is Susan Lambert, and she's the president of the BC Teachers Federation. Almost didn't get that out. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
When and why was the BC Teachers Federation started?
Well, it was started in 1917 because teachers were irregularly being paid by various school boards across the province, and so teachers got together, decided to join a collective, a union. Well, it wasn't a union at that time, but an association to protect themselves from being paid irregularly.
And so at that time, like, what was the structure like? Like, there couldn't have been too many schools, and were they like a small schoolhouse? And
actually, there was two structures that worked out: the rural schools, and that was mostly in the Okanagan, and then the Lower Mainland, and then it joined into a federation, and then eventually, and I'm not sure of the details of the history, but eventually the federation became a representative of every public school teacher in the province, and that's what we are now, exclusively and solely every public school teacher in the province.
And so at that time, way back when, they were paid by government? Like, was it a public service? How was that?
It was by school boards, and so it was municipal. It wasn't a provincial funding authority. So it was different from board to board to board.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when did it change? Because I wasn't sure, actually, if the BCTF was an association or a union. And then do teachers have an association as well?
We're a union, and we are the union. And it was actually Premier Vander Zalm that gave us the right and the option to choose to become a union or to remain an association, to become a union and bargain collectively under the Labor Code, or to remain an association and not have the Labor Code protection. And we chose to become a union. And I cannot remember the year, but it was when Bill Vander Zalm was Premier of the province.
So what did that mean, like, before, if you were an association? What changed, like, being a union?
Well, because we are a union, we are regulated under the Labor Code, and we have bargaining agency for every teacher, which means that we bargain. At that time, we bargained. At that time, under Van Dam, every district had its own association or union, local, and the local had bargaining agencies. So the local would bargain on behalf of its teachers. So in Prince Rupert, there would be the Prince Rupert District Teachers Union, and they would bargain with the school board in Prince Rupert, and so on throughout the over 70 districts at that time. But then, in 1989, I didn't know this was going to be a history thing. In 1989, I believe, 87, I suppose, we were given, I'm sorry, it's not 1989 or 1987, but sometime we were put under provincial bargaining. And provincial bargaining meant that the provincial federation got bargaining agency, and most matters were bargained at the provincial level, although we do have two-tiered bargaining and some bargaining at the local level. So over the years, things have evolved, and now as a provincial federation, it's mostly provincial bargaining on, especially on matters that require money.
So you must have a large membership.
41,000 teachers.
So you can't do the whole history, but...
no, I can't.
But since say, Vander Zalm and the change to be a union and having the law, I suppose, on your side, what has changed for teachers in recent hipright? What are some of the big changes?
The most significant change was prior to 2002, to January 2002, teachers were able to bargain class size and composition and non-enrolling staffing ratios. So you were able to bargain your working conditions, which meant that when you had those kinds of limits, that kind of clause language in collective agreements, that drove funding, that drove the contractual guarantee of funding. So if you had class sizes with a maximum, say in secondary school of 30, then you'd have to have government funding or district funding to allow for class sizes of 30.
To support the
collective
children
agreement.
or the students.
Yeah. So, of course, that was it's a primary interest for teachers to have class sizes that are actually teachable, to have small enough class sizes, to have working conditions where you can actually build conditions where kids can learn, that where you can have one-on-one and enough time to give individual attention to kids. However, on January 28th, 2002, the current provincial government stripped the ability of teachers, prohibited teachers from bargaining class size and composition, and stripped all the language that we had amassed over years of bargaining, and which you sacrifice for, because if you want some improvements in your collective agreement, then you have to sacrifice, say, wages or benefits. So we had sacrificed, in order to get these limits in our collective agreement, all of that clause language was stripped out. And what happened as a result of that was, because you don't have contractual guarantees,
right, you
have, it gives government what they called flexibility, the ability to defund public education. So every single year since January 28, 2002, we've had lower funding levels for public education in this province. And we have calculated that means, or has meant, over $3.3 billion taken out of public education over that 10-year, decade, 11-year period.
That's a lot of money taken
out
of
it's a lot of money.
An education system which we, propose to care about.
In my view, it's a privilege to represent teachers, and it's a privilege to represent public education, because in my view, and I think in the view of teachers, of course, we're possibly biased, it's probably the most critical public service that government can provide its citizens.
And I think people overall would say that's the case.
Right. But when you take that money out, what that means, that money represents teachers, classroom teachers, and teachers who support children with special needs. So what we've had over the last decade has been increasing class sizes and fewer supports for children with special needs, and fewer supports for classroom teachers. I became, after a while in my teaching career, a teacher librarian. And teacher librarians are like canaries in coal mines. We are dying on the vine out there because it's seen as an auxiliary service, as essential. And so boards, because they've lost so much funding, have sacrificed teacher librarians, counselors, ESL teachers, learning assistance teachers, resource room teachers, special ed teachers. All of those positions have been lost. We've lost about 3,500 teachers across the province over the decade, and we've lost about 1,500 teachers who provide specialist services directly aimed at children with learning challenges.
Now, this is going to seem like a silly question, but what does that mean for the children? What does that mean for the students? Like, how big are the class sizes getting? And it seems like it would be like a circle effect, like a snowball too, because
it's getting yes, it's getting very, very.
In terms of stress for the teacher,
it's very stressful.
Yeah.
And I describe it as a profound professional anxiety. When you know what a child needs and you cannot deliver that, you cannot deliver either the individual attention, or you cannot deliver the specialized service, or you cannot deliver the diagnostic assessment. All of those things add a stress level that is increasingly problematic. Teachers are stretched too thin. And that's why you have teachers speaking out. That's why we, as a union, are speaking out, And teachers are feeling increasingly frustrated with a provincial government that doesn't seem to value public education.
So why did you go into the teaching profession?
I cannot remember choosing. I can remember wanting to be a teacher when I was in about grade 6 or 7, and falling in love with the kindergarten teachers and helping in the kindergarten classrooms, becoming a future teacher in the Future Teachers Club in grade 8. And I cannot remember not wanting to be a teacher.
Now, for me, growing up, teachers had a profound effect on me. And that could be, negative depending on the teacher.
Yes, yeah.
And also watching how certain teachers dealt with fellow students. I want you to talk a bit about that. Like, it isn't just a babysitting situation. You know what I mean? Where you have the little girl next door coming over. It's like a huge responsibility because you can notice if somebody is having problems aside from
one of the
school.
One of the things that the Teachers Federation has identified as needing to be fixed as a primary goal of any government is to reduce child poverty. Because we're not the worst anymore. We used to be the worst for about a decade. Now Manitoba has beat us out. We're second to worst in Canada. But for teachers, we know when a child comes to school without breakfast, they're not ready to learn. They're not ready to learn if they've been witness violence, if they come to school wanting. And when you have in your classroom children who are affluent and children who are in want, it sets up an incredible and very sad dynamic. And for teachers, we understand, I guess, very, very well that a child who comes to school having no breakfast has far more immediate concerns than whatever the lesson is, and you need to deal with those right away. And so one of our platforms for public policy is the eradication of child violence, or child poverty, I should say. And so and child poverty is family poverty. It means we have to attend to poverty in our province. And also we, in schools in BC, because BC is such a receiving province on the Pacific Rim, we have refugee children who have post-traumatic stress, children who have never been to school. They can be 12, 13, or 14 years old and have never been to school. And so we need to have services and programs that allow those children to learn too. So there's such a variety of needs when you're talking about public schools. You don't, and you should never, the whole notion of public education is universal accessibility. So you're not discriminating to a particular group of children. You have a wide and variety of children who come with various learning needs and challenges and skills and strengths. And the public education system has to have the ability to allow every child to grow.